Mr. David Black here. He works for a company as managing director called Continent 8. I think that from our little chat yesterday, what I took out from that, apart from 20 years experience in tech and digital gaming industry, you've engaged in consultancy, executive roles in tech, and you have a BA honours in European politics. I think that the most interesting part of our conversation was that you started Continent 8 in Isle of Man, where there was just you and a cat, right?
Correct.
So, tell us a little bit more about your starting days and your career in tech. Do you feel there's enough in the education system to prepare people for the workplace nowadays?
Okay. So, first of all, thanks, Denise, for having me along at the event this evening. It's great to participate. I could also thank the Minister for attending and everybody here, but particularly you guys, because you're what it's all about. And we talk about the education system. The education system is not just about teachers or schools or universities. It's all of us and how we contribute to your happiness and success in the future. So that for me is the most important thing. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child. So I think that when we look at the education system as it's currently defined, how do we measure success of the education system? Potentially that is aligned to grades. And for me, I think that if I look back to when I was in school, it wasn't that long ago, honestly, there was no internet. So if you were born after, let's say, 1991, 92, 93, if you were born before that, you were educated without internet. So we look at the revolution that there has been in terms of the internet in the last 25 years. It's remarkable. So things that young people and people are making careers in today weren't even thought about 25 years ago, which really isn't that long a time. It wasn't even considered. So the education system, I feel at the moment, is about grades. I think that what, for me, the education system, the responsibility of us all, and as an employer, is to create intelligence that is rounded. So intelligence, it comes in many different shapes and forms. And so for me, I think that it's all of our responsibility to create an education system to make these fantastic young people every success they can do.
That's great. So from your experiences, Aaron, you then went on to take on computer science at university. Tell us, was this always your first choice?
Well, it was kind of between computer science and something in computing. I knew I wanted to work with computers in some capacity growing up. And I had some, because I also quite like tinkering around with like design and that kind of thing. So I thought, computer science or maybe like graphic design. But then sort of towards the end of my time at Bayside, I started thinking, you know what, I think especially after getting the exposure to CyberCenturion and the competitions and getting a taste for programming and scripting, that really kind of sold me to the idea. I wanna program. I wanna build things. So in a way, it was my first choice.
And you must be building pretty good stuff as well, seeing where you are now.
I just love sort of taking ideas and then sort of making pretty things on screens. But yeah, this whole experience with CyberCenturion was a great way to get a taste of that. And I think what's important is that not everyone has the same kind of opportunity to get that sort of exposure, which is why I think it's amazing the initiative is growing. Like if I didn't have that early exposure, like I don't know, maybe I would be doing something completely different. Maybe good, maybe bad, but I'm just really grateful that I had that. I think it's amazing that we're getting more kids the same opportunity as well.
Good. So David, back to you, and a little bit more of an opinion, having had long and successful career in the, well, not that long because you're very young as well, in the tech sector, do you feel that that's the wrong one. So do you think it's important to gain entrepreneurial experience within studies and within a professional career? Because you've juggled both. So what has that meant to you?
Yeah, I think that I've started off life in NatWest Bank. I was about a year in banking, and ever since then I have been in startup environments, whether that was my own startup environment or whether it was a young company that I was employed with or consulted to, and then I set up my own consulting company and so on. So entrepreneurial skills, I've always struggled to provide a definition in my own mind of what is an entrepreneur and what creates an entrepreneur. With that said, I think that Stuart, to me, is a classic entrepreneur, passionate, believes in his subject matter, and I think entrepreneurs come in all different ways, shapes and forms. So we see social enterprise as a lot of entrepreneurs in that area. So, as I said a moment ago, these young people may be working in industries when they're my age that have not yet been invented. So how can an education system deal with that? And entrepreneurial skills then, in its widest definition, has to include an ability to think in creative ways. So energy and enthusiasm and passion, yes, but an ability to think in different ways. And I think that if we can encourage young people and each other to think in different ways and be creative about how we think, then I think that is essential. However we define that process and however it works, I genuinely believe that things move on so quickly, things change so fast, that we need that ability to be agile, and that's a terrible word which I hate, but hopefully you get the idea.
So in between your studies, Aaron, you also embarked on various startups of your own, freelance software development projects and startups for social good. So tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, sure thing. So I actually, just before we go on, I really share the same sentiment about entrepreneurship and how we should encourage creative thinking. I think that's so important as well. And as someone who really sort of enjoys, like I mentioned before, like I've sort of been really passionate about like designing things, and I like kind of making videos and that kind of stuff. Throughout university, I've always looked for outlets for that. And so for me, getting involved in some entrepreneurial ventures and startups is a way to kind of be an outlet for that pent up creative energy. And so kind of in my second year of university and my third year of university, I started thinking, well, okay, I'm doing computer science and I have some free time. Let's try doing some freelance like software work, and that was really, really fun. I got to work with people who are just starting out their businesses, people who are like tutors and they wanted like a place to advertise their online presence, and also some local companies here, which was amazing. And that was sort of like my first delve into like entrepreneurship and the startup world, to try and like manage my own projects and that kind of thing. And then in my third year of university, I decided to try something a little bit different. So I was fortunate enough to get together with a group of friends, and we tried to, we entered this competition called the Hult Prize, which was about starting companies to do social good. And we had this really crazy idea. Why don't we try to tackle the issue of plastic waste in India? And to be honest, none of us were in the least bit qualified to tackle that. Like, we didn't really know much about plastic or recycling, but we thought we came across this story where there was someone on the ground taking plastic waste sourced from the local actual slum dwellers, and they would turn that into 3D printing filament. And we thought, that is really cool. Let's talk to this guy. And And so we did, and then we found that he had this problem. He said, I have this material that I'm producing, but I don't know what to do with it. So we thought, well, why don't we come in and we'll try and design a product? We'll be like the front end. So we did that. We went on this journey. We started designing and setting up a pipeline to manufacture glasses from plastic waste, which is collected by slum dwellers and then recycled by them as well. And we thought it'd be great to help give them better working conditions. And yeah, that was a really, really interesting project, and it ended up being successfully funded on Kickstarter just a couple of weeks ago as well. And we hope to actually start manufacturing sort of the mid this year and shipping out products, which has been an awesome journey so far.
Well done. So, back to Continent 8. You had your interim, but while you were sitting there with your cat in Isle of Man, can you tell us a little bit about the journey of Continent 8, what you do at Continent 8 and what your role there is?
Sure. So Continent 8 was formed in the Isle of Man in 2005. Prior to that, there was a business that was based in Canada, and Continent 8 internationalised that business. Long story there, but I had known the owners of what was to become Continent 8 for some time. The brand has been around since the late 90s. So I had done, as part of my consulting work, I had done some work for the owners of what became Continent 8, and with my usual impeccable planning, we got on great together. We had a great relationship, and I did a piece of consulting which was around how would this business work on an international setting, and I wrote the business plan for it and so on. And I was living in Ireland at the time, and my shareholder Michael Tobin said, this is all great, now you need to go to the Isle of Man and run it. So off I went, with at the time an 8-month-old baby as well. My wife and I went off to the Isle of Man, and we ran that for 5 years. The interesting thing is when you arrive as a startup, effectively, even though there was a business there, as you arrive as a startup, I remember having a chat with a lawyer friend of mine who had recently also gotten involved in a startup law firm. And we had a meeting at his office, and we got a sandwich. We brought the sandwich back to the office. We put it in the bin, and he said, nobody's going to empty that bin. And that was the point at which you realise you really do have to start from scratch everything. So it's everything from desks and phones and so on and so forth. And I love that. And I love you could watch something grow from me, and then you start to employ people, and we built data centres, and we got a network around the world, and it was fantastic to be a part of that story. And now again I am, but I've always just loved that building from grassroots and building it into something. And sometimes, as we all know, and I've had plenty of failures in startups, but some work, and thankfully more have worked than haven't. So so that's a little bit about the story. Continent 8 now, we have over 50 locations around the world, global network, security specialist, and we're very proud of our Gibraltar facility. It's an engineering feat in itself, and we continue to go from strength to strength.
Fantastic. So, Aaron, as a software engineer of a global tech giant, how do you think the workplace is evolving, and do you see more women entering the tech space?
Well, yes, absolutely. To your last point, I think that right now in the tech industry, it's quite evident there's a huge push to get more women in the workplace. And in STEM in general, we need more girls, which is why it's amazing to see so many of you taking part in the cyber competitions. Because they're right, there is this gap. But I also think that it's important to think about not just is there like an arbitrary gap, but are we addressing the difference in opportunities and barriers. Because it's one thing to say we have, you know, too few women, but it's another thing to say they don't have the same opportunities and, you know, they're having barriers. And I think to that second point, things are absolutely changing. I'm seeing it definitely in the workplace, and also, you know, I have one of my best friends. She's an amazing engineer. She's studying at Oxford. She just recently got into Facebook, and she sees. I have conversations with her quite often about this. And she says, yeah, you know, like a couple of years ago, I'd be applying for internships, and there was this almost subtle expectation that I was like second class. But she says that these days, it's changing a lot, and in fact, there's in some ways you could even argue it's actually an advantage as well, which I think is amazing that we're getting to that point. So yeah, and to your point about the workplace and how it's changing, I think I'm noticing now that especially in the bigger tech companies, there's a bit of sort of a decentralization of sort of where people are working. Whereas before you kind of have, you know, this kind of accumulation of people in one place. Now everything's a lot more like
a corporate structure, traditional corporate structure.
Yeah, everything was sort of in one place. Now it's more sort of dispersed, where, you know, a lot of these companies are devolving powers to their respective like different areas. We're seeing this with, like, for example, Apple is actually pushing a lot of people away from their Californian sort of campus in Cupertino to like Austin, and the same thing is happening with Google and Facebook because a lot of congestion that takes place in San Francisco as well, which means that it's becoming less important where you are to get involved in the tech industry, and I think that's amazing. And another thing I'm noticing as well is there seems to be this increased emphasis now on work-life balance. Because I think a lot of companies are waking up to the fact that to build great products, we need to really build great employees. We need to take care of our people. And I'm really seeing that from the inside, you know, whether it's a lot of initiatives to take care of people's wellness, but also in the culture itself. You know, I often get told off sometimes for staying after like 5:30. Be like, what are you doing? Go home. And I think it's great to emphasize that. You know, we live in a world where people are suffering from like chronic burnout because we're being asked to work longer hours and with lots of stress and stuff. And I think it's great that we're seeing this new consciousness around that. So
cool. So David, going back to your experience with startups, you've had some of your own. Can you tell us a little bit of the kind of startups that you've built yourself and what they did, and just generally your experience in that sort of startup world?
Yeah, surely. So I guess I could take a balanced approach here and say one that worked and one that didn't. Okay. So one that worked was, for example, it was the consulting business that I mentioned a moment ago, which brought me into a company in Continent 8. So I started off consulting, technology consulting around technology placement and data center and licensing and Continent 8, and I developed a great relationship. So I went from a startup me, and then sort of 2-3 years later into that consultancy career. It took me and opened doors into Continent 8, which has been now almost 20-year relationship, which is fantastic. During that time, I had a number of my own little projects that I've always tinkered with, a little bit like you were saying, Aaron. You know, we always like to tinker with our own things, but I guess on the not successful side, shall I put it, before digital ledger technology was called digital ledger technology, it was called all kinds of different things, so open data or whatever. And I thought this was a brilliant idea. And the problem was that I couldn't distinguish between the cause and the business. So I believed in the cause, but couldn't find the business. So I spent an awful long time in that. That has now moved on significantly since then. And there's fantastic success stories out there. In that
We now
area.
call it distributed ledger technology,
Yeah.
just for the record.
Oh, sorry. So, from my point of view, that was an experience where even in unsuccessful as it was, it showed that I had some type of antennae to see that this was maybe a common thing, but I had to accept that I couldn't find the business in it. But it was a very good learning experience, and so I think that in all of that, whether you succeed or you don't, you can always take learnings from these things, and as long as you're not pouring an enormous amount of cash flow. Some people do that. I never have. I've always been more on the ideas side of things and tried to self-generate capital or whatever. But yes, there are always going to be successes and failures in that, and you have to be resilient enough to not take that personally, and say that maybe your approach was right, maybe the idea was right, but you couldn't make it work, or alternatively that maybe you picked up an idea and it did work, and some will and some won't, and resilience is an important part of it, certainly.
Definitely. I also want to add that whilst I was in Silicon Valley recently, the founder of Reddit said on stage that with startups it's also about the timing, and it sounds like sometimes entrepreneurs get a little bit ahead of their time and can't make it work. So
yeah, I think that's really important actually, because there's two components to that. One is confidence, one is timing. Do you have the confidence to go for it, and is the timing right? And sometimes those two things can jive and you're lucky, sometimes you're not.
So, this is a question, actually all the questions you can both answer to, but as you said, the journey of the startups is not, actually in a lot of cases is not always successful. So Aaron, could you share a little bit of the ups and downs that you've experienced yourself whenever you've tried to start up?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I haven't had nearly as much experience in this as David has, but what I can say is that I think a good way to put it is, and I feel the same way about university in a lot of ways, that getting involved in startup culture gives you you have higher highs and lower lows. It seems like everything is like emphasized, and a lot of people think that having success is like a straight line, but it's really kind of like squiggles and ups and downs, and I think you have to be comfortable with that. And I think another challenge is kind of balancing any kind of startup activities and projects that you do with like your day job or like your studies, that kind of thing, and that can be quite challenging. But if you're the kind of person where you find that's a bit of like a release and you love it, then I think that overall it can add rather than take away to your energy. So that's something that I've definitely found.
Okay, so we're going to move a little bit back into the digital skills and why they're important. So David, as a potential employer locally, what is it that you look out for when you're recruiting tech talent? And what are the long-term goals of the Gibraltar branch of Continent 8?
Okay, so Gibraltar is the same for me as any of our other locations in the sense of how we recruit. So we will recruit, for me, evidential talent. It's number one. So not just that you're interested in something, but you've achieved in that area. Those kind of things that you guys have done in the UK. Evidential talent, work ethic, integrity, and likability. Those would be the four things that we're always looking for in people we recruit, irrespective of where in the world that may happen to be. So talent is a given, and it's how you can evidence the talent that you have in terms of clear achievement. That's why these kinds of things are so important for your future. As far as I'm concerned, evidential talent is evident here.
And in terms of more of the qualification side of the digital tech skills, what kind of openings would you have, not just in Gibraltar, but globally within Continent 8? Do you look for engineers, developers?
Yeah, I mean, we would be not on the software side of the house. We do have a DevOps department, but we wouldn't be a software company. We're hard hat engineering, or we're network engineers, or we're system engineers. So we are an engineering company. But people do come to us from different paths. So you know, there's diverse routes in. But if you're looking for a job as let's say, for example, a network engineer within Continent 8, we would be looking for all the relevant disciplines and, again, evidential skill in the area that we're recruiting in. But we're also looking for the other three things that I said, that, again, we're looking for those things to be demonstrable and evidential, so work ethic and integrity and likability. And so we take recruitment very seriously, but it all starts with, you know, the benchmark is you can have many paths in, but ultimately there's criteria. Those criteria need to be evidentially met.
And not just with Continent 8. So what would you say, just to reaffirm the importance of going maybe down that route, what would you say on a global scale are the most promising careers of the next 10 years?
It's an interesting question. I think clearly the internet is only going to get bigger. Connectivity will be a key part as we enter into the world of Internet of Things, for example. That will become more prevalent. Automotive industry and the skills and technology that will go on in there. So I think that internet clearly is going to be a significant growth area in all disciplines within internet work. But again, I come back to the comment I made earlier on, is that I think we should all be prepared for something that we didn't see coming, and just preparing intellectually, I guess, to say, are we aware in ourselves of our ability to change? Are we culturally ready for the next big change that comes? So I think you can pick out a few industries and a few things that will certainly in the next 10 years, I've mentioned a couple, but I think it's just as important as young people or as managers or whatever. We're all prepared to be creative in our own intellectual processes, but flexible enough to deal with whatever change comes next.
So how about you, Erin, who's more involved in like the new wave, the new generation of techies? How do you see the whole career path? And I also wanted to ask you, being a local and having built some startups, do you see advantages in building startups in Gibraltar?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think something that I kind of mentioned earlier was sort of to be involved in the tech industry now, especially location is becoming more and more irrelevant in one way. But I think in Gibraltar I kind of think of it as like this real fertile ground for startups and entrepreneurial like activity. And I think it's amazing that we have initiatives like the Startup Grind, for example, which is kind of just it's kind of showcasing that more is happening, and more things happening in the startup space here. Because we're a small place, but that's an advantage in many ways. You know, we know so many people, we have connections. This leads to a lot of synergies, and people have amazing ideas here. I just think that we need to make the most of that. Yeah, and yeah.
Cool. So, David, we talked about you being based in Northern Ireland and Gibraltar and the parallels there in terms of the sort of cultural implications of the traditional job path. Do you think this can affect a small jurisdiction long term?
Yeah. just to slightly put that in context, Northern
Yes.
Ireland and Gibraltar are very different places, as one might imagine. So, yes, but I do think they're in Northern Ireland, irrespective of political upheaval that there was throughout my childhood, for example, the education system tends to take young people, batch them into classes, batch them into curriculum, and batch them off into the appropriate career. And I think that, when it comes to those careers, typically in Ireland, in both parts of Ireland, it would be the law, accountancy, civil service of all descriptions, and maybe medicine. Right? So I think that the education path is either to be a university professor or one of those kind of areas. And of course, in the Ireland context, the manufacturing base has all but gone. Unfortunately, shipbuilding, for example, linen, rope, all of these things have gone. So Northern Ireland has a ways to go to recreate what it's doing, and there is good work being done. Gibraltar, I feel, is got so much youth and energy about it anyway, and you're used to reinvention. So I think that a lot of the cultural problems that Northern Ireland would have wouldn't be at the same, Gibraltar would be further along the path there, let's say. But as Aaron rightly says, this is a small place that can work to everybody's advantage, and does work to everybody's advantage. So, I think that culturally, the work that Stuart is doing, the fact that these things are happening, there's organisations here, the Gibraltar Israel Chamber of Commerce, for example, which does some fantastic work in terms of startups from Israel. I lived here around somewhere there. Do some fantastic work there. So you've got great people, great enthusiasm, and I really believe that Gibraltar is well placed. But the education system, it's about joining up that ecosystem to what's next, and that sort of preparedness in intelligent thinking, I think, cannot be overestimated.
So I have one last question, but I'm also going to ask the audience to start thinking about any questions you'd like to ask Aaron and David, because this one is always a hard one. But I encourage you to ask these great guys some questions. So just on the final note, what would be your advice? What could we do better to help nurture a local ecosystem for startups?
There you go first.
Okay, I'll try. I think these are the kinds of things that do work, because I really do believe that we talked about social enterprise, and we talked about entrepreneurship, and we talked about startups and so on. It's very much, for me, all of these things are about organising. So yourself, for example, here with the startup grind, that's organisation, that's bringing people together. That's, to me, how good things get established, and that could be anything from the startup grind in Gibraltar to the PG Woodhouse Appreciation Society. It could be anything, but having somebody actually to create and organise. So I think a lot of those things are here, and will continue to be here, and I think it gets great support, which is fantastic. So that's the most important thing, having a point to go to that we can say, yes, that makes sense. We can collaborate, we can share ideas, and this is the kind of forum that does that. In terms of the wider ecosystem, that's a big question, as we touched on the education system and how that flows through into work that may not have been invented yet. So this is why it's important that we share and collaborate, and we're able to work with young people especially to say, be creative, it's good, and having that organisation that allows us to collaborate is so important. Therefore, the ecosystem can kind of organically create itself, as well as the systemic need that there may be.
And I think to add to that, I think it's really important that we continue to support initiatives like, you know, the foundation and the work that Stuart's doing, and to get more involved in startup energy, startup culture, which is why I think, again, the startup grant stuff you're doing is amazing. And also to do this as a team. I think it's important that people surround themselves with an environment that encourages them to pursue things like this. There's a quote that comes to mind which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think it's so important that we don't just try and get passionate ourselves, but also find people that are also interested in getting into the tech industry, getting into startups and entrepreneurship, and then organizing with them and putting things out there. So yeah, I would definitely say do it together.
Great. So anybody that would like to ask a question, please feel free.
I'm just curious, where would you go to try and find like startup, like how to get involved in startup community?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat it in case anybody didn't hear. So you're asking, where would you go to get involved with a startup?
Yes.
Or just in the startup environment?
I think one good place to start is with friends and people you know that share the same interest and passion. Because if you can find like a group of people that have the same energy you have, then that's where the magic happens. But if you don't have that kind of base, then kind of putting yourself out there, going to events like this, for example, are a great way of doing that. And you'll find just with that interest you have, you'll put yourself in situations where you get exposed to like startup stuff, and then things will just magically start happening when you put yourself in the right places.
And what he said, that's exactly 100%.
It's a great question, by the way. Thank you.
Great question.
Our young members of the audience here participating. Well done. Anyone else have any questions? No? Okay. So, you want to say something to end our session today, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we could have a round of applause for the work Denise is doing and Stuart, which is amazing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.